Hey, Ralph. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, great. So, for the folks who don't know you, this is Ralph Ruiz, and he is an awesome coach that I met quite a few years ago now. It's adding up at the NLP Center of New York. And we've been in touch all this time. And I think this is the third time we're getting together on one of these chats. Um, and it's always a blast, and it's always a lot of fun to talk, even when we're not doing one of these. Because for some reason we always have a lot to talk about. You know,
Oh,
whether
yes.
it's whether it's our coaching or trading stocks or sports or working out. You know, there's I don't know, it's endless.
We can talk
Um,
forever.
yeah, yeah. So what we're gonna use as a kickoff today, or as a starting point, is kind of interesting. Is we're going to start with anxiety. We're going to start with this state, and recently Ralph's been doing a lot of work on his sites around and with his clients and his community around anxiety, and I'll have links to all of his stuff on the talk or below the talk. Um, but we thought we would just sort of have at it and look at how we both respond to that with our clients and in ourselves as well. So,
Mhm.
um, well, how did this come up for you with your community? Because your community, or at least the starting point for many of the people in your community, is maybe physical pain or things like that. So, how has anxiety sort of come up recently?
Oh, that's a good question. I find that one of the symptoms of anxiety is physical pain, and it, it also works the other way around. People who have chronic physical pain also tend to experience more anxiety. So
Mm,
anxiety was always in the picture. It's just that recently what I did was that I created the what I call the Ralph Fitness Club, which is a community that I created for people who want to go and get whatever resources they need to feel better.
mm, mm,
Uh, Pretty much information, just a bunch of information that is relevant to the experience of chronic pain, regardless of what the diagnosis may be. So recently, I picked it apart for the community. So we started by reading and focusing on chronic pain, the
mhm,
other side of the story, the one that most people don't hear about, which has to do with repressed negative emotions,
mhm,
repressed past experiences,
mhm,
negative emotions around past experiences, maybe some adverse childhood experiences that the person may have had growing
mhm,
up. And then from there, we pick that apart. So chronic pain usually is driven by repressed negative emotions, including repressed anxiety.
mm,
So we went into the emotional part. After we finished exploring chronic pain, we went into the emotional part and we picked that apart a little bit. What
mhm,
is it? What's the difference between a person who can experience emotions in a certain way and those that struggle with them? And then from there, we moved on to anxiety, which is where we are now. I've been there for the last couple months. Actually, it's been
Great.
almost a year now, just exploring um, what is anxiety, and
Mhm,
what's the relationship between anxiety, chronic pain, and other factors that usually uh, chronic pain and people who struggle with anxiety don't recognize in their life.
mm.
So that's how we ended up there.
Cool.
Yeah.
Very cool. So I'll go for a minute. Um, it a lot of times when I think about any emotion or something like anxiety that people have a label for, we don't necessarily all experience it the same way. But the way that I think about it is that we have uh, a certain constellation or a certain way that we're thinking that allows that experience to arise in our neurology.
Mhm.
And this very much comes from NLP or from meditation. So there's a certain recipe that a person may be doing cognitively that allows them to keep triggering that again and again and again.
Oh, yes.
And my assumption is that people, when they're not doing those things, will return to well-being on some level. You know, I was talking to a client, I think just yesterday, and they had said they were stressed. And I said, well, you know, stress is not, you know, you weren't born stressed, right? You know, like you didn't come out of the womb stressed necessarily. And many people, when they wake up in the morning, before they remember who they are and what's going on at work or what's going on in their relationships, and they won't be stressed. And then the minute they remember, it's like that whole recipe kicks off again.
Oh yeah.
Right. So so part of my approach in working with it is bringing sort of a mindful awareness to those things, and, you know, helping the person slow it down so that maybe they can do something else. And we were just talking a moment ago before this call, you were talking about that some of your approaches, a non-resistance approach, like not trying to fight it off, right? So what are you encouraging people to do when they notice that they are experiencing some anxiety?
Initially, I believe it's a good idea to develop a sense of awareness of, you know, it's like you said, we all experience anxiety differently. So it's a good idea to start by becoming aware of what your symptoms are, the most common ones, the ones that you're aware of, and possibly the ones that you're not aware of. I like to think of anxiety like hunger. Basically, we all experience a hunger, but we don't always experience the same type of hunger. You know, so sometimes we're hungry here. We want to eat something. It's like, man, I'm in the mood for some cheesecake, you know. And then other times you're hungry in your belly, and you're not hungry here, but you're hungry in your belly. And that's usually the type of hunger that you can kind of, okay, yeah, have lunch in an hour, but let me just finish this work first. So you can kind of like put it to the side. And then there are times when you have that hunger where it's not in the belly, it's not in the mouth, it's just everywhere, and you're starving. I need to eat something now. You feel a little fainty. You're like, you know. So anxiety works the same way. Sometimes it's our thoughts, and we don't feel it in the body. Sometimes it's the body, and we have no thoughts. We just feel funny, you know, something's not right. And then there's a type of anxiety that a lot of people seem to enjoy, which is the constant striving and being productive and doing more type of anxiety. And that one feels really good because it feels like an intense feeling of motivation, you know, and you're out there focusing on these future goals and these future plans. And then there's another final form of anxiety, which is usually hidden, and it's usually what we refer to as personality traits. That's usually the people who have the tendency to overdo stuff. They tend to have addictive personalities or perfectionists, you know, they go overboard with everything they do. So if you get the intense type of hunger, you know, that type of anxiety when you're like focused on your future and motivated and all that stuff, and then you overshoot that, you overdo it, before you know it, that in of itself creates the problems where you wake up in the morning and it's the first thing that jumps out at you. You know? So,
and go ahead, sorry.
So now it's basically helping the person realize which one are they experiencing, and what are the types of anxiety that brings them to that point, you know, when they're not feeling anxious. Because we could be anxious and not feel anxious, but when they're not feeling anxious, you know, when you're going above and beyond and overboard and not realizing it, only when you're experiencing the other type of hunger, the other type of anxiety, when you're all tense and freaking out and God, now I need a therapist. Yeah, how did you get here to begin with? You know?
Yeah, it's interesting. And one thing I like to say again and again is that these different experiences or emotions can just become habituated.
Yes.
And the reason I feel that's important for people to realize is when we're experiencing something a lot, very often we think there's a reason.
Right.
Like there must be something going on, right? But a lot of times there may not be. You've just internalized the pattern that may not be serving you at the moment.
Exactly.
It may have something to teach you, but it also may just be like really a habit that doesn't feel that good, right?
Right.
So I think that's a really important point. The other thing is that the exploration. I love what you're talking about. I like to say that it's great to become a connoisseur of your own emotions.
Yes.
Like tasting wine, like really getting into the nuances. And the reason that can be so useful is part of the problem isn't just the anxiety or whatever the emotion is. It's that we're letting the anxiety freak us out. Right? So we're having a response to it that's like, oh my God, I'm anxious that I'm anxious.
Yes.
And that just exasperates, it sets off a loop where when you start to really explore in the way Ralph's talking about, wow, is this anxiety the same as the one yesterday? What you're doing is you're bringing a different presence to it. You're bringing a calm observation, perhaps, or a curious observation, which can have a huge transformative effect on whatever that experience is.
That's right.
So that's definitely a part of what I like to have people do as well. Say more about this, the non-resistance that you were talking about before we started recording.
The non-resistance is pretty much once you're aware of what type of anxiety you experience, whenever you're experiencing it, because it's not always going to be the same.
Mm-hmm.
It really does change not just your perception of anxiety altogether, but also your relationship with it. One of the most empowering breakthroughs that I've seen working with people who have chronic anxiety, including myself, I had a similar breakthrough as well, is the realization that there's a part of us that enjoys it. There's a part of us that isn't completely against the entire experience. So now when you come to that realization, you go, wait a minute, I kind of do like this person or this thing, because you think about it, anxious people are people who are generally more anxious than others. They tend to be more productive as well. They tend to do more. They tend to be more proactive. They don't need anyone standing behind them, poking them all day long, telling them what to do, what tasks to do, how to be more productive at work. So there is a part of us that enjoys what or who we are and what we are experiencing. So yeah, there's a part of me that loves being a self-starter. I love getting up in the morning and taking on and conquering the world. So now we acknowledge, okay, there's a part of me that enjoys this, and there's a part of me that struggles with the side effects, of having this type of personality. And when you explore both the pros, the cons, the light and the dark, you find your middle area. You find that middle ground where you can very comfortably say, okay, I can see how the part of self that enjoys this starts to go overboard to the point where it's too much. Okay, so now to undo, we start with where you are. And if where you are is at the point where you've done too much, you don't fight it. You just recognize, okay, it's part of my anxious personality to want to do something about my anxiety. It's part of my anxious personality to want to fix this thing. It's
kind of overachieving. Yeah,
exactly. It's like it's part of my nature to want to overachieve whatever I have to do to get rid of the anxiety. So this brings about more awareness in the person and a deeper sense of grounding. And then from that point, Some people, some people have need a little more time, but some people very quickly are able to stand present with whatever that experience is, and then it moves on its own.
Mm,
Once it
mm,
moves on its own and the person moves towards their middle ground, towards their center, then from there, they can start working on whatever adjustments need to be made so they don't keep going back there. You know, it's like,
got
wow,
it.
I'm feeling super motivated today. I feel great, you know, but I'm not going to run for president of the United States because I know where that takes me, you know. It's my
Yeah,
overachieving nature, you know, going above and
yeah,
beyond.
yeah, yeah. And I mean, for myself, it's easy. Let's say it's the end of the day, it's 6, it's 7 o'clock, and I'm thinking I can handle a couple more calls, or I can just let me crank out this video or whatever it is, and it seems fine at that point. But when it's
That's
8
right.
or 9, I'm depleted, and now I can't really refill my tank. So it's not always an issue with the part of us that you're describing as anxious or overachieving. It's a problem with the ecosystem that they're like the rest of you needs to return to balance in some way as well.
That's right.
And so it's, it's balancing the part that really wants to achieve, and then the part that needs to relax sometimes or
That's right.
recharge their batteries.
That's right. And we do that
Yeah.
balance by pretty much just being aware and not resisting where we are. The body will find its center on its own. Once you're in your center, then from there you can start working with whatever adjustments needs to be made. And to add to that point, that's part of it. You know, you know that you have half a tank left, and instead of using that half a tank to experience the things that replenish you and bring you back to life, you use that half tank to push a little harder. Yeah, why not? You
Yeah.
know, and
Yeah.
now you have nothing in the tank to even relax. You know,
Yeah.
so
It's
that's right.
very
Pretty simple.
interesting. One thing that a lot of my clients bring up is challenges with sleep,
Hmm.
and which a lot of it is rumination, and there are tactics that you can use
Hmm.
to quiet that down. However, what I notice is uh, a lot of the people who are having issues with sleep are these people who are like hyperachieving or overachieving, right? And they very often want to be able to go to bed like
Mm.
at a drop, and they want to be able to wait. They want to. I'm going to go to bed at 12:01. Boom, and like there's not going to be any lead up to that. I'm going to fall asleep, and I'm going to wake up at 6:30, and that's enough.
That's it.
And
Like a
and so
machine.
it's yeah, it's that burning the candle on both sides, right? And that can cause tension in the system,
Absolutely.
right? It actually can, yeah, it can start. It's like overrunning an engine, right? It starts to wear and tear on it, on your basic equipment. And it's a little bit of a trap, because I think even if the positive intention is productivity or to feel good because you're achieving things, I find that most people's productivity goes down after they hit about 70 or 80%,
Hmm. I agree.
you know? So, yeah. Okay. And where do you go from there? Or is that the sort of the loop? So the first thing would be become aware of it,
And feel. Right?
feel
So
it,
the
allow
first step
yourself to
is
feel it.
feel it, allow yourself to feel it, get familiar with where you are, because you
Mhm.
will be back someday. You know,
Yeah.
life has its ways of, you know, you conquered anxiety, you haven't had anxiety for years, and then out of nowhere,
Yeah.
you know, COVID happens, or 2008
Yeah.
happens, or some really,
And let
you
me
know,
say, we're not saying there's anything wrong with anxiety. We're not saying
exactly.
there's anything wrong with anybody, and especially in kind of overt circumstances like COVID, lockdown, right? These are people have responses
Normal.
to those,
That's right.
and part of the the skills that we're talking about learning here are, so the shit hits the fan, so to
Yeah,
speak. It's
exactly.
the old expression, when the shit hits the fan, you have some tools to deal with. Like once you freaked out, you know, there was this old joke, like what's the difference between somebody who lives in the woods and somebody who's never been there? And they said that if somebody who's never been there, they're walking on the path and they see a snake and they go, ah, snake, snake, and they go running away. And somebody who lives in the forest, they're walking on the path and a snake crossed their path and they hop over it and they go, snake, and just keep walking.
Exactly.
And so it's a little bit like that. It's not letting the experience freak you out so much.
Exactly.
Right?
And for some people, they see a snake, they go, ooh, dinner.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Many different responses. Yeah.
But definitely. So first is just being aware, recognizing your symptoms and what you do when you're in that experience. With the people that I work with, chronic pain sufferers, the majority of the time, not always, but the majority of them push harder. So if they're threatened by something and they feel uncomfortable, they feel anxious, they push harder. And that's where they get trapped. They become obsessed with the problem, like completely obsessed. Until someone comes around and taps them on the shoulder and go, hey, are you aware that you're obsessed with this thing? Me? No, wait, am I? The awareness brings them out of that obsessiveness. So that's a very important key step. Once we move from there, a little more centered, a little more grounded. Now here comes some of the chronic lifestyle habits, patterns that need to be looked at. Perhaps a person may not realize that one of their patterns is that they're not very good at saying no. They're not very good at allowing other people to take care of their responsibilities. They're not very good at setting boundaries. So now these lifestyle changes come in and we go, okay, seems like when you're running at a 50% left in your gas tank, there seems to be no way to turn it off. There's so many responsibilities, work, school, life, children, if there are any, so many things to move around. So now we look at what life skills are necessary to help this person stay there,
and create more of an ecosystem that works for them.
Exactly. And from there, we might need to explore some limiting beliefs, might need to explore some self-image ideas or concepts, and take it from there. The ability to recognize their needs, emotional, psychological, financial, social, etc., etc. All of these tiny details, just to
which
help
are huge.
Person. They're huge, exactly. Tiny little things that make a big difference. And once life decides that, hey, here's a big stressful situation, it's not like they go completely back to where they were before in terms of their level of anxiety. They can feel the anxiety. Like you said, they have the resources now, they have the skills to know how to cope with the experience of being in it. But now they also have the skills to get out.
Great.
And stay out, until the next time.
Until the next time. Yeah.
But it's never the same.
Yeah, because I feel that sometimes when, kind of looping back to this non-resistance, sometimes when people have an experience of any unsavory emotion, it creates a push-pull. On the one hand, they're feeling it, but they're trying to get away from it, which, their system is pushing them towards it, and then they're trying to get away from it instead of welcoming it, right? Is something that I like to talk about. And very often when you welcome it, it can work its way through your system.
Absolutely.
So I think that's a big issue. And, when you were talking about, you stated a really nice checklist of things that can be going on in the person's life that may be causing some of this anxiety, or, having the system off balance. And one thing that I notice very often is that people may not be questioning their standards and where their standards came from. So for example, somebody might be like, I've got to achieve. It's like a given. It's like, So where did that come from? You know,
That's
is
right.
it your standard, or was it taught to you as a child? Perhaps did you take on a parent's standard, which is very often the case? And is that something that you want to keep at that level? Because that can be the hamster wheel, right? It's like,
Yes,
I got to keep going. I got to keep going. I got to keep
that's
going.
right.
It's like,
That's the
and it's
glue.
like, oh, is this a satisfying hamster wheel, or do I want a different one, right?
That's right.
Like a tricked out
That's
hamster wheel.
somebody else's hamster wheel.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah.
That's
Great.
right.
Well, this is really fantastic, and I think it's something that the things that we're describing here and things that you're describing here are very actionable. Like
Yes,
somebody who's listening to this, they can, you may want to listen to it more than once, but these are things that you can try for yourself,
that's
allowing
right.
yourself to have that experience. Um, One thing I do recommend, if somebody's experiencing a lot of anxiety, like if it's getting to a fever pitch, sometimes I like to invite people to slow down and center first before they're inviting it. Just
Absolutely.
just so that they're grounding, so that they're not completely overwhelmed. Now, sometimes you're just stuck in it, and that's where you got to start. However, if you can do some centering, some deep breathing, and then say, all right, give me your best shot. Let me see what this feels like.
That's right. Let's see what the
And
big fuss is about.
yeah, exactly. I really like what you were saying about noticing the different types of anxiety. Is this my Tuesday morning anxiety, or is it my Thursday afternoon or middle of the night?
That's right. Do I want cheesecake or not?
Yeah, yeah. It would actually be interesting. I hadn't thought about this in a long time. It's interesting at times to keep for a week or two an emotion journal where you just log a couple times a day. What am I feeling? What's going on? What am I feeling? What's going on? And it's amazing sometimes that it can really point out how these things become habituated.
Mhm.
Some emotions show up at the same time every week
Yes, like clockwork.
or every day. Yeah. So
I agree.
good. Any particular resources or anything of any of your content that, we'll include it in the links, but anything you want to point out for people, or can they, if we put the link, can they find your Mighty Networks
Oh
page and all
yeah,
that? And great.
yeah. They
So
can
some
join the
of that
page
that's
and
open.
yeah,
Great.
it's open. They can go and watch
Yeah.
some videos. Most of them are
Yeah.
recordings. We don't have it's videos, but it's only the recording. And join one of the calls, have a chat, and we'll see how that goes. Uh, in
That's
terms
great.
of in terms of resources, um, one resource I can share with everyone is to be mindful of your perception of anxiety. That's very important. If we demonize the experience, like you said, we're only going to keep getting more anxious about the anxiety. But
Mm,
instead, looking at it, you know, I, I like I like to use hunger as an example
mm,
because hunger is hunger. You know, no
mm.
one freaks out over their hunger. Anxiety is anxiety. And when we've become anxious about it, it becomes a whole different monster. But if we
Mm.
can be aware that it's a normal human experience that everyone has, um, it puts things into a different perspective. No one freaks out when they're hungry, unless you absolutely
Right.
have nothing to eat.
Yeah.
Uh, then
Then
that's
you get
that's when
anxious. Yeah.
then you get anxious. Exactly.
Yeah.
Then it's a
Yeah.
real problem. So
Yeah.
anxiety works the same way. It's not really a problem um, unless you don't have the resources to know how to deal with it. You
Mhm.
don't have the food available to you.
Well, that's a really good point. Is um, a lot of times when somebody is caught up in that type of emotion, like anxiety, because they're so focused on that, they're not getting access to the inner resources that might really
Exactly.
help them see their way out of it.
Exactly.
So that's why the centering is so important, the kind of mindful awareness that you're talking about.
That's right.
So, great. So for people who don't know, so Ralph's channel is on a platform called Mighty Networks, which is really cool. So we'll put the link to that. Different than Facebook or YouTube, and a lot of cool resources there people can check out and find out more about your work.
Thank you.
So, well, thanks for joining me as always.
Thank you for
always a
having me.
pleasure. Great.
Likewise.
Until next time.